Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Great Goddess. Praise be to Goddess. Praise be to Goddess. Well, here it is, another Wednesday, and today we have for you the subject, Beware of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And I'm not joking about this. I take this fully seriously. And it's no insult to wolves. No insult to wolves at all. Just don't ignore the part about wolf. How about a monster in sheep's clothing? That's more like it. Because the wolves are innocent animals, whereas there's monsters in our world that are human monsters that we have to beware of. And we have to beware of them because they're monsters in sheep's clothing. And we have to beware of these people because they represent a threat to what we believe, to the things that we hold dear. And because they represent a threat to the things we hold dear, we have to beware of them. Let me give my first example. My first example is that a friend recently recommended an author to me. She recommended a book to me, and I checked it out of the library. And this book was by Marion Zimmer Bradley. Now, Marion Zimmer Bradley, I didn't know anything about her before, never heard of her, wasn't influenced by her, and any of my dialogues with you about Goddess, I've not been influenced by her at all. Never knew about her, didn't know she existed, didn't know anything about her. So this friend of mine recommended her to me, and I read her book. I read her Mists of Avalon book up to a certain point, and then I couldn't stand it anymore, and I took it back to the library and turned it in. Why? Why did I stop reading her book? Good question. And I'm about to answer that in short order. In her book Mists of Avalon, Marion Zimmer Bradley vividly depicts child abuse. And it's not just any child abuse, it's child abuse within a ritual setting. And so part of her ritual is child abuse in this book. And what she describes a little girl scattering dark drops, as she puts it. And the dark drops, we have to surmise, are drops of blood because they ritually slaughtered a deer, something else I don't care much for, but they ritually slaughtered a deer in the name of Goddess. And so this girl was scattering dark drops, presumably dark drops of blood, along the path. Along the way, she was scattering these dark drops. What happens to the little girl later? Later in the book, she describes the little girl having her legs parted and being shoved down, and then describes the little girl's screams resounding through the whole valley where they're stationed. Her screams carry everywhere. And this is horrifying to me. There wasn't any resolution. There wasn't any resolution in this book for this little girl. There was no resolution in the book. It just happened in the book and was just ignored, just as if the little girl didn't matter, as if she didn't matter at all. And I was horrified. I thought, how can you make a ritual? I'll tell you what kind of ritual it was. It was the sacred marriage, also known as the Great Rite. by certain magicians. And in the Great Rite, also known as the Sacred Marriage, there's copulation of the two opposing figures, the male and the female, come together in the Great Rite to it's sex magic. That's the only way I can describe it. It's sex magic performed by pagans and occasionally Wiccans or other witches. So it's a magical rite of passage. Now, what magical rite of passage is Marion Zimmer Bradley describing? She is describing the union of a brother and sister. So it's an incestuous union. And neither one of them is aware of the fact that they're mating with their brother and sister. They were tricked into it by a character named Vivian, which is the Lady of the Lake. So she makes Vivian into an instant villain. And these two were fooled into it. Now, in the original story, Morgause is the sister, and she, this Morgause, tricks King Arthur into sleeping with her, and she gets a child by her brother and becomes the villain. Morgause is one of the villains. Well, in this story, Morgause is the aunt, and the sister that sleeps with him is Morgaine. And Morgaine is Morgan Le Fay. And she doesn't know that he's her brother. She gets tricked. So she gets fooled into sleeping with her brother. And during this rite of passage, during this great rite, this sacred marriage, that is when she incorporates child abuse into her sacred rite. Now, who in their right minds, I was reading this thinking, who in their right minds incorporates child abuse into one of their magical rites? Who thinks this way? Who does things like this? Well, it turns out that I looked it up online. I typed it in Marion Zimmer Bradley child abuse, and out popped this abuse allegation by her daughter and her son and several other children who were abused by her. They all accused her of child abuse. And she was a child molester. Get this, she was a child molester. Her husband was also a child molester, and she protected him from prosecution. And she was supposedly even worse than he was, according to their daughter, who is Moira Greyland. Moira Greyland and Mark Greyland accused their father, Walter Breen, and their mother, Marion Zimmer Bradley, of abusing them as children. And it's tragic. It's a tragic story. It's very hard to read about. But I'm going to read you now the Wikipedia excerpt of this tragedy. In 2014, Bradley was accused of sexual abuse by her daughter, Moira Greyland, who stated she was molested from the age of 3 to 12. Greyland, in an email by The Guardian, said that she had not spoken out before, quote, because I thought that my mother's fans would be angry with me for saying anything against someone who had championed women's rights and made so many of them feel differently about themselves and their lives. I didn't want to hurt anyone she had helped, so I just kept my mouth shut, unquote. Greyland also claimed that she was not the only victim and that she was one of the people who reported her father, Walter H. Breen, for child molestation, for which he received multiple convictions. By her own admission, Bradley was aware of her husband's behavior, although she chose not to report him. So this mother chooses not to report the abuse. She protects this child molester, and she's also guilty of child molestation. The two of them molested kids together. In response to these allegations, on July 2nd, 2014, Victor Gallant, Ltd., the publisher of Bradley's digital backlist, announced that it will donate all income from the sales of Bradley's ebooks to the charity Save the Children. The author, Janie Lee Zimmer, who has continued to write books in Bradley's Darkover series, announced on June 13, 2014, that she would be donating advances from her two Darkover books, her Darkover royalties, and at the request of her husband, Larry Hammer, payment for his sale to Bradley's magazine to the American anti-sexual assault organization Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, also known as RAIN. Since the allegations were made public, two of Bradley's children, Moira Greyland and Mark Greyland, have spoken at length about their experiences, and a number of famous science fiction authors have publicly condemned Bradley. Among the first was John Scalzi, who within a day of the allegations being made public described the allegations as horrific. Hugo Award winner Jim C. Hines wrote, all of which makes the revelations about Marion Zimmer Bradley protecting a known child rapist and molesting her own daughter and others even more tragic. G. Willow Wilson, World Fantasy Award winner, said she was speechless. Diana L. Paxson, who collaborated with Bradley on a number of novels and who continued to write novels set in the Avalon series after Bradley's death, said that she was shocked and appalled to read Moira Greyland's posts about her mother. So that's the whole story, and we have to guard against putting too much faith in one person, like Marion Zimmer Bradley, because people like Marion Zimmer Bradley can turn on us. In fact, they can render us incapable of continuing on if we're too attached to them, too attached and too admiring of them. That if we admire people like that, we're going to be let down. Now, as soon as I read about the child abuse in her book, I took the book back to the library and tossed it in the slot. I was not about to read the rest of her book after I read about the child abuse. So, what we need to know is that there are people out there who will take advantage of our love of Goddess and do things in the name of Goddess that are horrific. And they will do them without worrying about the consequences. For example, there was a man in India who sacrificed his son. And I believe he sacrificed his son to the goddess Kali. Now, we don't worship Kali. We the goddess worshippers, don't worship Kali specifically. But Kali is a goddess figure. So he did this in the name of Goddess. He did this act of killing his own son in the name of Goddess. He sacrificed his son to the goddess. He cut off his head. He chopped off his neck. And it was horrifying to me to read. I couldn't. I had to suspend my disbelief because it was something so unbelievable that somebody sacrificed their son to God in the name of Goddess. But things like this happen, and we have to be aware of these monsters in sheep's clothing that or wolves in sheep's clothing that are in our midst, that are claim to be goddess worshippers and claim to be devout, but do horrific things in goddess's name and use her as an excuse for their abuses. And so here's another example. In Phoenix, Arizona, there was this group of supposed goddess worshippers. And this might have happened other places. This might have also happened in California. I'm not sure. But in Phoenix, there was this group of goddess worshippers who got in trouble with the police. The police were tape recording and listening in and doing stings of this group who were prostituting themselves in goddess's name. The women in the group were prostitutes, and they were supposedly sacred prostitutes doing the deed to further the goddess's agenda, yada yada, whatever it was. They were making money for their cult by selling their bodies in prostitution. The women of the group were selling their bodies in prostitution. So they stung the group. They did a sting of the group, and they took them all away to prison. So that's another example of where, be careful if you get involved with a group, because you don't know whether it's a group you can trust or not. See, you have to be sure that it's somebody you can trust, somebody you can trust, before you get involved in a group like that, because they could be doing prostitution, they could be doing illegal things, selling drugs, they could be taking drugs, they could be abusing children. Who knows what they're doing? They could even be committing murder. Who knows? All we know is that people have done horrific things in the name of goddess. Now you see why the goddess doesn't even want or need to be worshipped, because all these experimenters, all these people doing these experimental things, are all doing it in her name because she's uncharted territory. People don't know how to worship her. People don't know how to love her. And they don't love her. So they do experimental things in her name because she's different. Because she's not the known God. The God that would disapprove of those things. She's the goddess. She's somebody who they don't know and don't love and are using to do these experimental things. So any alternative person who wants to rape a child in the name, or who wants to do drugs in the name, or sell sex in the name, or sacrifice a son in the name, just goes to goddess because they've been told the god disapproves, but nobody ever told them that the goddess disapproves. So they go to goddess and do these things, and then they ruin goddess's reputation. That's what they've done. They're ruining her reputation. They're all accursed. They're all accursed. Their name shall be accursed, because they did all these things in the name of goddess to humiliate her and to degrade the goddess. And the goddess does not want these things done in her name, or done at all. So she shies away from people who might worship her because she knows that they might do horrific things. So we have to show the goddess that we care. We have to show her with our prayers and our concerns that we would never, ever approve of child abuse in her name, that we would never, ever kill in her name, or destroy in her name, or commit prostitution in her name. We won't do these things. We won't do any of these things. We have to show that Goddess that we mean what we say and that we're not going to do these things to her ever. And that we, the goddess worshippers, the true goddess worshippers, are very devout and care about Goddess and care about the rights of other people. That we care about other people. Yeah, and that we care what happens to them and that we don't do these things ever in her name or otherwise in our own private time. So that's it. And beware of these monsters in sheep's clothing, these wolves in sheep's clothing, these monsters that do these horrific things. Beware of them and be afraid of them, fear them, and don't ever let them win. Don't let them win. Don't let them try to destroy Goddess for everyone else. I'm Sarah Jane Alphawolf, bidding you a good week and a good day.